Are you concerned about the mental health or well-being of your personnel? Have the events of this last year had a negative impact on you or your people's stress levels? Are you ready to learn something new? If so, then you are in for a treat, because during this session of the EMS Leadership Summit, you're going to discover a whole new way of thinking about healthy living and why being unfit can be a good thing. Hi, I'm Lisa Robbie, co-host of the 2021 EMS Leadership Summit, and I am thrilled to introduce you to Rob Cook. Rob is a mindset coach and creator of the Unfit brand. He helps his clients discover their total health and go from potential to something tangible. In this session, Rob shares his experiences in the military and his transformation afterwards, which has led to his unique outlook on health. Thank you, Rob, for being with us, and welcome to the EMS Leadership Summit.
Oh, super excited to be here, and thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really looking forward to introducing you to our audience. As you know, we are primarily focused on EMS, emergency medical services leaders, and up and coming, as well as people who have been around. I like to call seasoned EMS leaders. So I'm really looking forward to you sharing what you've experienced and what you see and what you help your clients with, because I think it's going to be incredibly helpful for our folks. So what do you say we start with telling us a little bit about this unfit and what it means and how it might apply to anyone, really?
Good place to start. I love it. Before I do that, again, thank you for having me. But to all of the EMS leadership and everyone who's attending this conference that works in that capacity, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. And I remember when I used to hear that as a military member, I was like, But now, with the way I really do understand and what the brand Unfit has evolved to, I really want to express with sincerity how much I appreciate that, because I believe those who operate in the EMS community do so from what I would call our default setting: space of love, space of service, space of humanity. And so that's really what the brand is about. Originally, when I started, I kind of leaned it more toward fitness because I thought it would just be easier for people to hear me in talking about fitness. And I was also going through my own troubles of trying to grapple with the 21-year military career that was ending and all the stresses and new changes. And I didn't even know if I felt fit enough to talk to these mental health issues or the struggle. I, again, have been diagnosed with PTSD and things like that. So I just thought it would be much easier to talk about fitness. And as the journey continued of self-growth and getting a deeper understanding of my life and my true identity, my true nature, I really found out what I was doing was just not trying to fit in, because that was creating a lot of suffering for me, trying to put myself in the boxes that had been created for me. And I originally thought it was just me until I started talking to other people, and I started finding out, oh, wait, a lot of people are suffering from this, trying to be what their parents thought they should, or what their friends think, or whatever career path you're on, you got to do it this way or that. And that just prompted me to get very bold about challenging the norms to kind of rediscover our true nature for a healthier way of living. And that's all the brand is. And I use the tagline, never compromise yourself. And that is my core belief, that we start as love before anything I ever can identify with, whether my color, whether my veteran status, my political affiliation, marital status, or even parental status. I am love and light before that. And as long as I never compromise that part of me, I get to show up in all these different capacities. And that is, I think, what was so drawing to me in the security forces perfection of my career field, or being a protection agent, was the duty of being fully engaged with serving another human being, meeting the needs, showing up to a situation with no idea what you would face, and leaving it with some type of solutions. And it was just what appeared to be like a only based off, or what appeared to look at that time was like, I can only get that in my job. And the more and more I began to live, it showed up in just every day. Just speaking to people at the grocery store and the way they respond back and realize, oh, you're hurting.
Mm.
Oh, you're hurting. Let's just have a conversation at the produce section then. Like for me, that's my EMS. That's me, showing up in produce and just having a conversation with a guy who just moved to California and didn't know what he wanted to do and just felt very disturbed. So that's pretty much the brand in itself is just going back to rediscovering our true nature of light and love and letting that show up in whatever capacity we operate or perform in our jobs and our lives.
I love that so much. I'm almost speechless, which never happens. What do you say after that? Like, it's so powerful to understand when you say never compromise who you are. And I might not have gotten that perfectly right, but you're talking not about your character that you play or the story that you've created,
No.
but that deep innermost part of not who we really are, not even part, like our essential nature, which is love and light.
Oh, yeah.
And to know that that's always there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I love the unfit, like stop trying to fit in, right? Stop trying to look the right way or talk the right way or follow somebody else's ideas of what your life should look like.
Yeah. It creates such or let me say, I'll just speak for myself. For me, it created an extensive amount of suffering because I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. So I was taught a particular way to deal with race relations, but it conflicted everything in me.
Mm.
And so having certain situations happen where it was mandated that I be angry about it, but I couldn't find myself to muster up the anger.
Mm.
All I could find was the compassion. All I could see was a little bit different side of the story. And it just rumbled for a while. And then it became, okay, do you want to keep your friends or don't keep your friends? Are you selfish for thinking this way or not? And it was just this ping pong effect that was, making me, I often joke with people, I'm probably the most extroverted introvert you'll ever meet because I love people, except when you're trying to box me in somewhere. I'm like, like a cat in the corner. And I fight very, very fiercely because I just love this space of being able to love all of humanity. I don't agree with it. Now, I want to make that abundantly clear. There's certain things in this world that, no, I don't agree with. But it doesn't mean the way that I show up, I'm going to show up with it how they are. I don't meet hate with hate. I don't meet evil with evil. That just makes more of the same. I just want to show up with it in a different way, in a different manner. And again, I could be totally wrong. This just works for me, though.
Right. Well, and it seems like you said, like the stress and the strife and the suffering comes from going against your true nature, right? Like when we, the old expression of putting a square peg in a round hole. And I remember for myself, all the times I tried to fit in high school and even throughout my career, and, how unhappy I was. And, and then to find if I was just my authentic self, right? And figuring out what that was, right? Because I thought, before I learned my essential nature and before I had those, insights, I guess, into that, I thought my authentic self was more of my story, but, and then I was able to say, wait a minute, even that's a story.
Yeah.
Like you said, like who you are before that, like who
Yeah.
you are before all the labels, before all the thinking, before, form, really, just the energy.
Exactly. I love the way you said that. I use the terms before the form or from formless to form, because I remember hearing Miles Monroe say this quote once, and he said, if you don't understand the purpose of something, abuse is inevitable. And so there was a few things I didn't understand. For instance, my body. I didn't understand my body. I thought my body was about cutting up to a certain weight and looking a certain image so that I can get the tag healthy. And that caused a lot of abuse on the body. I didn't understand that food was simply fuel. It wasn't any cultural affiliation. It was fuel for my body. So I misused the way I ate sometimes. But most importantly, what I remember was my story, the stories I brought with me, the trauma, even the PTSD, all of that. When I found that I was misusing that story, because I was using the story to beat myself up over the head, I was using the story to hold me back. The story was simply to point to my resilience because I was here to tell it. Like, that's all a story is.
Wow.
A story was never meant to stifle you, or you wouldn't have made it past it. The fact that we are sitting here now and I could bring up a bunch of different stories where I had faced death, that shouldn't bring any more fear on me. It should lighten up the atmosphere to say that's resilience. That's what's possible. That's what the story was for. And once that clicked for me, a lot of suffering kind of just fell away.
Wow. I've never heard it articulated that way. I'm so blown away by that because, it's so much easier for me to see with, oh yeah, like, didn't understand how my body works. So, in my case, I thought, it's resilient. It's just going to take care of itself. And then, you get to be a certain age and you're like, oh, that's not true, and then you realize, food is fuel and it's not pleasure. It's not, like you said, a childhood memory, or it's not comfort. It's not any of those things. It's fuel. And that's really the intention. And then when you get that, it's like, oh, well, okay, now you're going to do that differently. And then, but I've never, ever thought of the point of the story was to demonstrate your resilience.
Yeah.
That's like,
I mean, just think about it. When you meet somebody, right? And you sit down, you're over dinner, and they tell you they've been through the so-called ringer. It's the first thing come out your mouth, like, oh my God, you're so resilient.
yeah.
Or how did you do that? Or you're just amazed that they were there to tell you about it.
Yeah.
And that's it.
But it's interesting because I'm going to say it this way because I've been a coach for ever, it seems like, close to 30 years. I've been coaching people, and the misuse of the story it's to show I'm damaged.
Mm-hmm.
It's to show there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Because this thing happened to me. So now I'm injured or traumatized or broken, or, all the different phrases that people used. And what I've said to people over the years is, maybe it's your thinking that's damaged.
Yeah.
Or how you think about it. Not like your thinking is damaged, like brain damage or something, but more like the thinking that you have about the situation has been injured but you're not, you're here. The light and love inside of you is never, ever, ever diminished. It gets covered up like the sun gets covered up by the clouds, but nobody says, oh, the clouds have diminished the power of the sun.
Yeah.
Nope.
Never. Yeah.
So that's so powerful. And, as we're sitting here and I'm thinking about the, numerous EMS workers who suffer from this idea of trauma or the, difficult situations that they've lived through and saved lives through and attempted to save lives through, not always successfully, but did their level best to do. Walking around thinking that story somehow shows that something's wrong with them. I'm really hoping that they hear something in this.
Oh yeah, I did my whole 21-year career thinking I was broken. The whole 21 years. That's why I reached for so many different accomplishments and everything to something to just validate for me I wasn't broken. You know, I remember in 2014, I received a performance report that said I was the number one of 126 for my job. So out of 126 people, my commander said I was number one. And I thought for a minute how hard I had worked to get that. And I smiled and I kind of was like, yeah. No sooner than I got back downstairs to my desk was I almost in tears because it paled in comparison to what I had lost to get there.
Mm.
I'd been through a divorce at that point, wasn't talking to my kids, didn't really have close relationships, had a lot of judgment in my head. Um, and it was like, whoa, you did what you thought you went, you got to be number one. And that still wasn't enough. You had the notoriety, you were at the top of your field. Like I did protection. So if you were to think of how the Secret Service protects the president, I did it for the Department of Defense. So I protected our highest ranking military leaders. So if you were a chief of staff of the Air Force, a four-star general, or the secretary of the Air Force, and then I got the opportunity to go over into special operations and protect the commanders of special operations. But I remember working with Admiral McCraven, who's most notably known for Operation Neptune Spear, the killing of Osama bin Laden. And just watching him was one of the most amazing things I'd ever seen before because he can be having an intellectual conversation on Congress about a multi-billion-dollar budget for special operations, get in the motorcade and be like, hey, Rod, want to go shoot hoops at lunch? And I'm like, what? We were just talking about people dying and this, but his ability to just flow within his wisdom, to flow within the whole being. Yeah, he saw some pretty bad things. He was in Mogadishu for Black Hawk Down, not the movie, but the real Mogadishu. He was one of the if I have my facts right, I think he was also one of the sailors who was there for Captain Phillips, the Tom Hanks movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think he was there for that too. So he literally had experiences where you would think they would be trauma filled, but he was using those to really, really set people up to be successful in their positions. And following that man just was like one of the most unbelievable things because that was kind of like the first time I was like, wait, I think I can use all of it. Like now I even speak in prisons. Well, you know what comes up very well there? My childhood of growing up in the inner city. It was like the stuff I was trying to press down so that the military didn't know and my friends didn't know. I came from a single parent household. I lived in a Section 8 housing projects and,
Right.
but now that's the first thing I want these kids to understand because that's where they come from and that's what connects. And it was like this, oh, it's all the whole story. It's all used to point someone to their resilience, even the work.
Yeah. When you see it for what it is.
When you see it for what it is. I
Not
love
who
that.
you are.
Yeah.
Something you experienced,
Mm.
but not who you are. Right.
And that was it. Because we use, I think it's probably more, but I would say most of the categories people use to identify themselves. You start with body. So, that could be your gender, that could be your race, whatever you want to say, or your body type. People will use that to identify themselves. So I'm black, or, tell me a little bit about yourself. Oh, I'm black. Well, that's your color. I'm an athletic person. Okay, that's just your build. You also have like your preferences. Tell me a little bit about this. Oh, I'm heterosexual. That's your preference. I think that's not you. That's not that's a label in a sense, or I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. Again, that's another label. Experience is one that for a long time I never put in the box. But I've heard people identify themselves. Oh, well, I was abused as a child and oh, that's an experience. It's not you. And I really started realizing how at first I thought it was the identity trying to deal with the world. And I realized that the identity was within me. Like everything I was choosing to say who I was within this being, that love and light I was talking about. And if I could just figure out how to allow who I truly am at my nature to come through, then I never had to be scared of any of those boxes.
Mm.
I also didn't have to scare myself about the other boxes everybody else was in. So that opened up me to wanting to have the conversations with people I never talked with before. That opened up me to lose my biases and judgments and prejudices a bunch against people groups and again those who choose their preferences. And it was like, oh man, was I doing a doozy on myself by thinking I was broken?
Mm.
You know, but once it made sense to me that the system worked, I just needed to figure it out. Again, if you don't understand the purpose of some, abuse is inevitable. And at that point, I was even trying to place value on some which I had no identity of. How you do that? Like, how do you put value on something you can't even identify?
Right.
It was just like this time of I don't know if you want to call it reflect. Actually, reflection would be a good word to use. The reflection of seeing my true self.
Mm.
And that's kind of it gave me what I would consider a bold energy to handle the days. You know, I enjoy a lot of them, and I embrace a lot of them. You know, I say enjoy the good ones and embrace the learning.
Mm.
You do those two things, you're just about fine. You're just about fine.
Yeah. You know, just what came to mind as you were talking, many people that I've coached over the years, and I think it was even true for me early on, was the thought of giving up some of my labels. I was very conflicting
Yeah.
because if I'm not that, then who am I, right? Or, um, you know, my father died when I was 9 years old, and that got me something in a certain way, and by telling that story, um, sympathy or specialness or, but one of the things that really, early in my transformational work, way back in the early 90s, it was getting like the cost of my identification with those things.
Yeah.
That it was costing far more than the goodies or the benefits that I was getting out of it. And I think, for a lot of people, that's not something they're aware of,
Yeah.
that they don't even realize that, and again, innocently, that they don't realize that they're actually identifying with it because it looks like they're getting something out of it, or it looks like,
Oh yeah.
there's
Mhm.
some, I don't know, benefits probably not the right word, but something in it for them,
Oh yeah.
so it's like almost like a life preserver. I better hang on to this, but in the letting go of it is where all the freedom comes from, because then again, it's not who you are, it's something you experienced. You can use it, like you talked about using your experiences when you're in the prisons, talking to kids, or when you're connecting with somebody, you can use whatever experience you had, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be your life preserver, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
you mentioned this question before we started recording. You said, who's driving your life? And this feels like a place to kind of segue to that. Can you say a
Yeah.
little bit about what you were talking to me about
Yeah.
that?
I was with the client and she had thrown this question out after we were going back and forth. And she says, I think what I'm hearing is who who is living my life. And we talked about it some more, but what I got from it was, wait a minute. At the moment something happened, who is living that experience? Is it me at my true nature? Or is it the rhetoric I've told myself about this people group? Is it the prejudices, biases, discriminations that I built up as so-called security blankets to help me navigate through humanity? Is it the expectations of my parents? Is it the expectation of my kids, my spouse, or what? Like, who's living the life? And if you really think about it, sometimes most people will go a long time before they ever live a day in their life because every other day has been for everyone else.
Mm.
And so that conversation or that prompt was because one of my biggest foundational principles is to prioritize your self-care. Like, take care of you. And if I can say nothing else, that was the one thing I missed that I don't think I mean, I showed up well, obviously honorably, and was able to retire. But if I had to do it over, so to speak, I would do it over with just prioritizing my self-care, and helping others from the overflow rather than the deficit. You know, letting my cup get empty because I'm thinking I have to feed them from mine,
Mm.
and not realizing that, no, if I take care of me, that really girds me up to handle these situations a lot more. And it's so funny, you mentioned training earlier. All the training that I got when we got to protection school, you know, there's conventional warfare and the way we fight and we fall into teams and that. But when you get into protection, it's kind of a lot more fluid. It's kind of a lot more chaotic and responsive in that sense. But maybe not any more than anything else, but it felt that way at the time. Um, and we would go through all this training. And at the end of the class, pretty much the last little segment of classes we were doing the critiques to leave was about trusting your instincts. And I'd be like, shouldn't you have led with that? Like, you know, shouldn't you have led with that? Because I've replaced my instincts with all this training. And again, I put the training before the instincts. And I think if we had led with that, my instincts coupled with this training would have made me tremendous in certain atmospheres or certain environments, better said, you know. And so again, it's just about understanding the space and the point in which you're going to start this day, this experience.
Yeah. It's so powerful what you're saying. And I think sometimes as leaders, we miss the boat here because, we're looking at our schedule of the coverage for the shifts, or we're looking at, recruitment, maybe, our numbers are down. And so I think sometimes, and again, best of intentions, but we sometimes forget about helping our people to see that self-care has to be their number one priority. That if they're selflessly or self-sacrificing, that is just not how you want someone to show up to work or to a critical incident. And I think the culture of EMS over the long run has been this self-sacrificing mentality, probably more in a, not as, what's the word? I want to say out loud. It's more of a background conversation,
Yeah.
You
Undertone. Yeah.
get your badge of honor because you worked 40 out, 40 hours in 3 days or something, and I just think that as leaders, we have to get better at empowering our people to take care of themselves first.
Yeah. I really love that because I do know the difference in my performance when I had a leader that was really making sure I was taking care of myself and taking care of my family versus one who just needed me to punch the clock, do the grind. There was a difference in the way that I showed up. And I just got in a lot of trouble when I first came in, again, because I came from the inner city and I was trying to bring that way of living to the military, and it does not fit. So note to self, if you ever try it, it does not fit, okay? But I always had this, I don't know what you want to call it, but this attachment to take those under as my team that were the outcasts or the misfits, right? And remember this team I had in Montana doing nuclear security. I had a airman who was playing with his weapon on post and shot through the floor of the vehicle. I had a guy who had abused some prescription drugs. I had I can't even remember some of the other problems that I had, but this was my team. And I think it was about a year that we had the highest performance evaluation test scores. We had the most college education hours collectively. Um, and they were changing. They were changing the way they were looking at. And what I got from that was I was letting them, I had already known they were the shit, the creators of the shit in the unit, So that was just a norm. So I never judged them off of that. I was just trying to look for something else in them. And I could see that each one of them had a reason how that happened. The individual, nope. I mean, I'm pretty sure they probably asked him in investigation, but it never made it through the translation. But I sat down, I was like, man, what were you thinking? He said, about my divorce. And he said, what happened was I was sitting there and I was arguing with my wife on the phone. And I'm like, oh. And he says, I was so angry, I just started playing with the gun. And next thing I know, it shot the floor. So had I known he was going through such a horrible divorce where he was barely eating because he didn't make enough money to support them both in two different households, I probably could have met his need. The drug abuser of prescription drugs wasn't that at all. It ran out of his prescription. And he just was in so much pain from a back surgery that he took his wife's prescription. Well, when you work around nuclear weapons, it's a no. You can't do it. So I don't want to, say, oh, that's okay. But man, if I just knew that part, And it was just like everybody, when they show up, is bringing where they come from. And as a leader, I made sure from that point and when I was in Montana on, that I knew the environment they was coming from. Mm. I knew their wives, knew their kids' birthdays. Not that you got to do all that, but it was just the way it made sense to me. If your kid's birthday is coming and I'm looking at the calendar and there's not a mission or your anniversary or something, hey, take him off that mission, put him on, because this is his anniversary weekend. Hey, you're off. Put your weapon in the vault, go home. Like doing those things, those people showed up for me. Man, and when they showed up right. Like they showed up excited to really do the job.
Yeah, you're bringing in so many great points that, when you have your focus on self-care, it's not just physical well-being, but it's all that.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
And that comes from connecting with your people and understanding like how are they thinking and what's important to them, and getting curious and not just having them sort of be cogs in a machine, or spokes in the wheel. Like they're full human beings over there, with a whole life that is influencing every moment of every day. And so, how are you caring for your people, right? And how are they showing up, right? And when you are there to help people get beyond the labels that they see. And again, obviously leaders are doing the best they can with what they have in their own understanding, but understanding that behind every label, every image that someone has of themselves, there's who they really are.
Yeah.
And then there's, who shows up, right? All the trappings that we bring with us, like the wardrobe.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's not just, I don't want to make it seem like it was just telling them either. It was them having to visually see me take breaks. It was having to tell them, hey, Sergeant such and such is in charge this weekend. Contact him. Well, where are you going? I'm going to deal with this, or I'm going to take some time. I'm going to do. It was showing them through the actions also where they could actually, because that's honestly where, in my opinion, some of the as you were saying, the unwritten rules come in is if I'm following this great leader and they're putting in 40, 50 hours in 3 days, well, I admire them. I
Yeah.
respect them. So if I want to ascend to that level, I'm automatically thinking I got to put in 40 and 50 hours in a 3 day period. And I totally missed that he didn't do that when he first came in. I totally missed that she didn't do that when she first came in. I totally missed all that. So it is as much as telling them is letting them see you do it.
Yes.
You not do 40 hours in 3 days. It's not good for anyone.
No. No. And, there's a whole lot of debate right now about these 24-hour shifts with EMS, and, that's for another conversation. But
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is that there are ways to just take care of ourselves, even when we're working, right?
Mhm.
Being willing to take breaks, making sure you're eating, making sure you're, resting when you need to.
Yeah.
And some houses are really busy and it's hard to do, but, are you making sure that your people are eating? Are you making sure your people are eating good food? You're not just ordering pizza every 5 minutes. You're giving lots of opportunities. So, it's none of what we're talking about is prescriptive, right? We're just um, trying to help people kind of become innovative, right? To
Oh, absolutely.
start
I'm every
using their own
time.
wisdom and thinking
Yes.
about, how can I better take care of my people?
Yeah.
How
I
can I
I
better
love
take
that.
care of myself?
Hmm. I absolutely love that because I remember trying to tell people what they should do in their lives and how irresponsible that was, not knowing their lives. Right? I didn't know. I didn't know. I think one of the biggest things I ever missed in the military was after 9/11, not catching what the Muslim service members felt about the rhetoric around us calling all Muslims extremists.
Mm,
Like that was one of the big ones I missed. Um, and now I see that I have no right to tell you about your life. The things in which I'm pointing to just simply put you in a little bit better position to make a better decision for yourself about your life. I use 5 things. One is, again, I said it, to prioritize self-care. Well, if you prioritize self-care, pretty much gonna line yourself up to make the best decisions you see possible for you. Not saying they all go your way. Again, that's where the enjoy or the embrace comes in, you know. But then also because of the type of work and not knowing the atmosphere in which we show up, you got to move. And you got to move. You got to be able to move the body. Eating, you mentioned it. Oh my God, the pizzas, the snacks, the all of the things that make you physically fatigued. Your job is showing up, responding to critical incidents, but you're putting in the fuel that makes you fatigued. That's counterproductive to our mission overall as a unit. So after I get my eating, I'm not saying you got to be vegan or vegetarian, any of that, but man, don't the gummy bears is mine. That was my thing. But sleep is another key. Like you have to sleep well. Maybe you don't get all 8 hours in one night but take those power naps throughout. But sleep is where the body regenerates. So many things happen in sleep. I do a program at a health institute, and there's this guy come in, Dr. Millicent, and he's all about sleep. He even says, and I've never heard this before, but when your body gets into sleep, your brain shrinks and the fluid in your brain washes the toxins out,
mm,
giving you a clarity when you wake up.
wow.
So most people say sleep on it. All right. And I was like, oh, well, if clarity is what helps me most in emergency situations, and I ain't sleeping because I'm doing 40 hours in 3 days, again, counterproductive to the mission.
Right.
Counterproduction to the mission. And the last one is laughing. And the only reason I really love laughing is because it's one of few things I think you have to be in the present moment to do. Can't laugh in the past. Can't laugh in the future. It's right now. And if that's for nothing, I mean, when you show up on scene, if it's nothing more than looking at your teammate like, ain't this some shit? Like just laughing out, right? Just for a minute. Just for a minute to break away all of that stress, anxiety, and stuff that comes to when you do show up on the scene and body parts are in different places, or someone is, across the bow, guts hanging out, you know. Another time I missed was we responded to a ordnance exploding, and my team responded to do, there in Iraq. And I had been deployed a couple times. It never hit me that the kids who their first deployment was going to have a problem seeing some of their peers with sheets over them and blood stains in it. I mean, we'd seen, right? Like I thought everybody had that, and it wasn't true. It wasn't true. And it was just like, oh. And so I started making sure all of my units have fun. If you just take a break for a minute and laugh. Again, laughing is not saying the situations in which we're dealing with aren't serious or aren't of extreme nature. And obviously there's a what we would say, watch the room kind of thing.
Yeah,
like,
be respectful.
Yeah, not telling a grieving parent, hey, your kid just bad. Like that's inappropriate on all levels. But just being able to be present for a moment. Those kind of things are not a prescription again, but they just seem to put me in a much better place when I deal with stuff. And I find that my clients who take on those saying find better clarity and a little bit more focus or a little bit more energy in their lives for it.
Yeah. Well, I just find this in my work with my coaching clients in particular, I find that, when they can take themselves a little less seriously, right? And they can look at the situation and be like, oh, maybe this isn't life or death. Maybe
yeah.
The significance that I'm adding on this particular situation is a little cray-cray, that because it gets them present, it allows some of the clouds to clear and that love and light can come through. Right? Because they're not so burdened by the heaviness that they got created, right? So I have found that to be a very effective for folks to be able to just lighten up a little bit. And again, I think of course you're being respectful. We're not talking about cracking jokes in an inappropriate time. But even back in the days when I was a child abuse investigator, you would after the case, or back at the office, or we'd end up at the police station, and there'd be some joke, some crack up, maybe totally unrelated to the scene we just dealt with or the situation, but it was something to get you out of your thinking,
out of it, yes,
into the moment and see that, life is going to keep going, life, you can't let life stop at that last incident. Because that's then you got one foot stuck in the past trying
to, it's like a broken clock,
yeah
don't let your life clock stop at that experience and then you go on with these days but your clock is still stuck in that experience. No, don't do that. And you brought up a very good point though that I would like to touch on, and that is because the nature of the position, especially in the EMS world, the habit of the things in which you show up to day in and day out are life or death. And that habit then translates to something as simple as cooking on the stove being a life or death situation. And you meeting it with all of that tension, anxiety, and then the person that you're dealing with is like, this was a 2. This was not 100. Like, it's no way. And then that's when you start feeling uncomfortable. And that's when it was like walking into secure buildings and doing this. All right. It's a secure building. There are snipers on the freaking roof right now. Like, what am I doing? But I'd gotten so used to having to be tense.
Yeah.
that even when I didn't have to be, I didn't know what that felt like to relax. I
Yeah.
didn't know how to. And I felt like if I did relax, I was gonna lose my edge when I showed up to the scenes or when I was doing protection. And I think I'm probably the most smiling damn protection agent that was ever out there, you know.
Well, it's such a good point, because if you're on a level 10 all the time when you're on the job, and you take that to every situation, it's like to a hammer, everything's a nail, right? Like,
Uh,
not everything's a nail, and not everything requires a hammer, right? And not everything requires a level 10 response. And the thing is that, my business partner and co-founder of the academy, and the co-host of the summit, Robbie McHugh, is a paramedic and has been a paramedic for many years. And he says, even those emergencies by and large are something like 2 to 5% of the time. So, the possibility is always there. So it's that living on, braced for the next crisis. But 95 to 98% of the time, it's not that kind of a call. And so,
yeah.
being willing to, bring the appropriate level of response to the situation, whether it's while you're on duty or whether you're when you're on off duty, right?
Mm.
Is being able to differentiate that, I think, is a crucial skill, for people's self-care and every one of the other, the 5 things you mentioned, because you can make moving your body, coming from that stressed, hyper place, that's bad, right?
That,
Or even
yeah.
eating from that, oh, I can never eat, sugar, or, like that rigidness, and bringing that level of stress to it, trying to sleep when you're like in that heightened, must do, right?
Uh-huh.
So everything is different when you're in that, anxiety level, or that top like intensity, and not everything requires that. As a matter of fact, most of the time things don't require that.
Well, I mean, that's all I would say. What they've tagged us with is post-traumatic stress disorder is I've lost the ability to flip that switch on and off. And I just keep the light on. And no matter what, it's just 10. Everything is 10. That's all I think it is. It's just, and if we can get everyone back to showing them that they do have the ability and the power to flip the switch and turn it off when it's necessary to be turned off. A lot of our service providers, I'll call all of them, to include military, police, nurses, EMS, all of it. Um, we wouldn't have as many of the bad statistics that I read sometime around our community
Yeah.
of the burnout or the suicide rate or things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something in reminding them about that, especially from a leadership perspective, almost like it actually how structure all of these communities are. Leadership is very important. So it's kind of like now I would probably point the earnest almost on the leadership more to make this a warrior ethos. A warrior ethos of your unit is about taking care of yourself. I think just now during going back and forth, I would point to the leadership to ensure that.
Yeah.
Like you want a unit that operates, then point to these things because your people will show up for you.
Absolutely.
They're already there. And
That's
they're that thing, they're already there, you know.
Yeah, and you want them showing up in their best self, and
Yeah.
leaving that way too, right?
Mhm.
Leaving the shift as their best self and arriving as their best self, not losing anything in that shift.
I heard a wife scream once at a commander. Um, he was saying to her in a very demeaning tone, um, "You need to send him to work in a good state of mind." And her response to him was like jaw dropping. She said, "I'll do that when you send him home in one."
Mm,
It's like, oh shit, oh we in trouble, oh she in trouble, they in trouble, you know. So it was like, oh, but that's a very like what you just say, you know, if their family sends them out to do this work, to give of themselves, to miss birthdays, anniversary dinners sometimes, family visits, the least we could do, the least we could do as their unit, as their team, is try our best to send them back into that environment good.
Yeah.
It becomes kind of like we work together, community. You know, the family members of EMS leadership, of EMS service, or of military or policemen are just as important.
Oh, yeah.
It's one team, you know, one team, one fight. And now I say one love, you know, it's one team, one fight with one love. And yeah, we should do that together.
That's fantastic. I love that. So we're just about out of time. I feel like you and I could talk for, days. So is there anything for you as we wrap up that you just really want to make sure, um, any message you want to leave people with, or any final thoughts?
No, I mean, nothing more than really know before anything else that you are light and love. And even if a situation that you're currently facing doesn't look like it, just stop for a second. Just slow it down enough to stop for a second. Go back at it with some light and some love. And I'm almost positive. I'm not a gambling person, but I'm almost positive it'll look different for you.
Mm,
And that little difference in how it looks is enough to get you over the hump.
that's so true. Well, Rob, thank you so much for
Thank you for having me.
this conversation. It changed me. And, I also really want to thank you for your service. You thanked our audience, and I appreciate that. But you gave of yourself for 21 years. And I know that you just gave everything you had as far as, your best effort.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just really want to thank you for that. I really honor you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and we will see you at another presentation.